So Thanksgiving is a movie that is playing into, I think, familiar tropes of 70s and 80s slasher movies, but it's also tying itself into the Thanksgiving holiday. And this is the latest feature film from Eli Roth, who has notably directed a slew of horror films in the past. So he is no novice to this. This is his bread and butter. This is what he does. But this is an interesting premise just based off of the fact that we don't really get a lot of Thanksgiving films in general. Like, there's not a
That's
ton
true.
of Thanksgiving movies. There's a ton of Christmas movies. Obviously,
Hmm.
horror and Halloween are synonymous with one another. But Thanksgiving as a holiday kind of gets overlooked in terms of cinematic movies. But this is a new feature film that I think people may or may not tap into when it comes to future Thanksgiving holidays. But we got a chance to go check this out over the holiday, in fact. And so all of that out the way, I'll pass it over to you, man. What did you think about Eli Roth's new movie Thanksgiving?
I love how we're getting more and more like seasonal horror films. Like what there's a movie coming out in a couple weeks. I forgot what it's called. It's like another fight, I don't know, kind of horror film. But also we got like Violent Night last year. It's just crazy. I don't know where all these movies are coming from. It's kind of funny. But we'll see what that if that list keeps getting larger. There's probably more Easter slasher movies that's gonna come out, or like I don't know, man. There's a
Oh
lot.
God.
I know, man, there's a lot. But Thanksgiving, Eli Roth, man, what an interesting just movie maker, because he's up and down for me. He's wishy washy. You never know what Eli Roth is going to do, and I feel like it's been a while since I actually liked an Eli Roth movie, but here we are. I really like Thanksgiving, and what makes Thanksgiving so so decent or so good to me is it's very reminiscent of all the other slasher movies we've ever gotten, but it still finds its own way to kind of have its own, I guess, personality, to have its own it has its own voice. And I think that's really cool coming into the film. Because again, it easily could have fell under, oh, this feels like Scream, this feels like Halloween, this feels like any other slasher film. And it does again have that DNA, but it finds its way to have its own. It is kind of funny at times. It is very brutal at times. In fact, one of my favorite things about the movie is the kills. That's a lot of how slasher movies work. Like, oh, what are the kills going to look like? But I think they do a pretty good job of raising the tension in this film, and in making some very interesting kills. This movie really is, it's about a Black Friday riot that ends in some a tragedy, and there's a guy dressed up like what is it
Oh, a
called,
pilgrim.
a pilgrim, because they literally live in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And he's going around and picking off people one by one during this holiday season. And so, man, it's even that premise alone, I was like, let's do this. I'm ready. Like, what is this movie gonna be? And I think it's just a ton of fun. Again, I think you're gonna laugh. I think you're gonna have fun with it. I think, again, if you like slasher movies, you're gonna find some refreshness in the kills, and the way just the story plays out. Some of the acting was fun. Some of the acting was like what I expected it to be, but it's a fun little slasher movie. I really don't have too much to say about it, but that I enjoyed myself, and shout out to Eli Roth for actually having something that feels like dang, I walked away like, huh, I like that movie. That was a good Thanksgiving slasher horror film. And now I'm like, man, I can't wait to watch it next Thanksgiving too. Because like, damn, like you said, there's not a lot of Thanksgiving movies, but now I actually think we might have one.
Yeah, I mean, this new era of horror, which is largely tapping into grief and trauma and psychological, we don't get a ton of original slashers. A lot of slasher franchises have come back. Obviously, Halloween has had a very
Mm-hmm.
successful trilogy. Scream, which we're going to talk about again later in this podcast, has had some successful new outings, and they had their moment in the sun. Scream in the '90s, Halloween in the '70s and the '80s, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street,
Mm-hmm.
and of course all the films that ripped off those formulas that were established by those other franchises as well. And so we just don't get a ton of them lately. And I'm just glad that a new slasher exists, and it's one that is original, and it has a new
Mm-hmm.
story to tell, and it's completely different because it is tied to a holiday season, which makes it even more compelling because when you think about Thanksgiving and you think about food and you think about the utensils that you use and the cooking materials and all that
Yeah.
stuff, you can get really, really creative with how you kill people if that's your whole idea and your whole premise as a killer. And if
Mm-hmm.
you've seen the trailer, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of the kills are based on Thanksgiving dishes, and that's actually really, really interesting stuff that is equally stomach churning, but also like damn, I want to lean in and figure out more. Like, what are we doing here? Like, are we about to serve up this meal to people? And it's just so much wild stuff that happens. And for that, I really, really enjoy Thanksgiving because some of these kills and some of the murders, they are brutal. They are super mean and unforgiving. It's like, wow, we're just really going there. And there's a high body count. There's not a lot of people that ultimately survive, which I certainly appreciate because that raises the stakes. That makes you think about your heroes being in peril and ultimately like whether or not they're going to get out of the situation. And, horror, maybe more than any other genre, you're not guaranteed a happy ending. Oftentimes, you're actually guaranteed a very bad ending, a very dour, sad ending, and so that's also ultimately something that's also interesting as well. And but this one is just really, really fun. I think even with the story, the fact that it's a little bit of a longer horror movie, it's about an hour 45. It never lost me. There's a really good story at the center of it. There's a mystery there as well. You're trying to figure out who is behind this pilgrim mask. That makes it compelling and makes you want to stick with the story. And the characters that they assemble here, they all have their own place in the story as well that make them, as compelling as they probably can be in this type of subject matter. You don't expect the most amount of depth here. We're not necessarily launching a new sort of it slasher girl in the same fashion as a Sydney with Scream or Laurie Strode in Halloween. Like there's nobody to that stature that would be able to carry this type of franchise forward, but they do just enough, I think, to make you care about everybody that's at play and to ultimately figure out like, well, who's behind this? What's going on here? And of course, like it's all tied to that event that you talked about earlier with the Black Friday shopping that ended in tragedy. And so there's enough here to make it a really, really fun ride. I think that this was definitely a pleasant surprise. And by the trailers, looking at it initially, I was like, oh, that has good potential. Whether or not it can deliver, that'll be the question that we'll have to see. And ultimately, it did deliver for me. This is something that I certainly want to revisit in the future. And I think that this has franchise potential too. I think you can do some really, really cool, inventive stuff here if they have more interesting stories to tell. Like there could be some additional entries that can do some equally creative stuff. It'll just depend on where they go with some of that stuff. But it was good. It was a good time. Definitely enjoyed it. Funny, laughable, brutal, all those great things that you expect out of a slasher, a teen slasher as well. It kind of delivered on those things for me. And so we'll have to see what the future of Thanksgiving and potentially what a franchise might look like from this particular property. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on Thanksgiving. If you've checked out this brand new feature film, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.